JNIM right now lies within the countries of Mali and Burkina Faso, and to some degree Niger. Yes, the epicenter.
So the last time Michael Langley was in front of a committee, he negatively mentioned Ibrahim Traore and it went viral. It was a PR nightmare for the United States, and I believe it is what has cost him his position as AFRICOM leader. However, he still has to fill out the final few days, weeks, months, I'm not sure how long it is, of his tenure, which means one more time in front of this same committee. So in this video, we're going to break down more of Michael Langley, where he has to answer questions regarding America's public stated directives of what they're planning to do in Africa. I'm going to break down what's happening between the lines, the doublespeak, the covert ideas that I think they're forming around their publicly stated intentions. If you're interested in the betterment of the continent of Africa, this video is for you. For those of you that don't know, my name is TJ and I'm Nigerian and British mixed. And on this channel, we talk about African geopolitics.
As I get closer to the end of my tenure of command, I remain in awe of the character and the capabilities of the men and women willing to serve our nation. Now, ordinarily, I would be joined by my command senior enlisted leader, Sergeant Major Michael Woods. Today, he's in Morocco for the Africa Senior Enlisted Leaders Conference. Now, Morocco is a shining example of a great return on our investment.
Listen to those words carefully. Return on our investment. General Langley just told us exactly how America sees African countries, not as partners, not as equals, but as investments that need to pay back returns. This language reveals the corporate mindset behind US Africa policy. When businesses talk about returns on investment, they expect profits. When military commanders use this language about sovereign nations, they're admitting Africa is being treated as a profit center for American interests. Morocco isn't being praised for helping Africans develop their own capabilities. They're being praised for serving as America's regional enforcer. When Langley says Morocco is exporting security across the continent, he means Morocco is implementing American security policies in other African countries. This makes Morocco a subcontractor in the neocolonial project. The Morocco model is particularly insidious because it uses an African country to control other African countries. This provides plausible deniability. America can claim it's supporting African solutions to African problems while actually directing those solutions through a compliant proxy state. Morocco also has deep historical ties with France and maintains close military cooperation with both Paris and Washington. This isn't coincidence, it's coordination. France uses its historical influence in Francophone Africa, while America provides broader strategic support. Morocco serves both masters, acting as a bridge between French neocolonial networks and American strategic interests. The timing is crucial too. As the AES countries reject Western influence, Morocco becomes even more valuable as a staging ground for counter-revolution. Every military training program Morocco runs in other African countries potentially creates networks loyal to Western interests rather than genuine African unity.
Yes, the epicenter of JNIM right now lies within the countries of Mali and Burkina Faso, and to some degree Niger. But it's threatening.
Let's examine this carefully.
JNIM,
which stands for Group for the Support of Islam and Muslims, just happens to operate exactly where the AES countries kicked out Western forces. This isn't coincidence, it's consequence. Notice Langley's specific choice of words.
Yes, the epicenter.
If you've been following his public appearances since his last congressional hearing, his podcast interviews and speaking events, he's been using this term more and more when discussing the AES region.
Knowing that that's the epicenter of global terrorism,
he has coupled this with claims that terrorist groups may gain the capability to strike inside the United States directly. This is despite zero evidence in the actual capabilities or stated intentions of any of these groups to strike America. Now he's stating it directly in official testimony. This escalating language suggests something bigger might be coming, and this framing could be building justification for much more aggressive military action than simple counterterrorism operations. Here's a pattern we've seen before. First, label a region as a terrorist epicenter. Second, suggest these groups might threaten American lives directly. Third, argue that extraordinary action becomes necessary to protect the homeland. What often follows is regime change disguised as counterterrorism. Genim emerged from the chaos created by France's 2013 intervention in Mali. Operation Serval was supposed to fight terrorism, but instead it shattered existing power structures and created conditions for new extremist groups to flourish. Just like ISIS emerged from America's Iraq invasion, Janim grew stronger after French intervention supposedly came to help Mali. The timing reveals everything. Jenim's most significant growth occurred during the heaviest Western military involvement in the Sahel, as France deployed thousands of troops and America expanded drone operations. JNIM evolved from local grievances into a regional network. Western intervention didn't solve terrorism, it industrialized it. Now, as Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger assert sovereignty through the AES alliance, they're suddenly painted as the epicenter of terrorism. Countries that chose independence over Western tutelage are being framed as security threats. This classic colonial manipulation paints independence movements as dangerous to justify continued intervention. This escalating epicenter rhetoric could be preparing American public opinion for more aggressive action. When politicians and generals frame potential military intervention as defending American families from terrorist attacks, opposition becomes nearly impossible. The emotional manipulation has justified every major American military intervention of the past 2 decades. If this language continues escalating, we might see intelligence agencies discover specific plots against American targets. Media would amplify these threats. Politicians could demand decisive action to protect American lives. Any resulting military intervention would likely be framed not as neocolonial aggression, but as heroic defense of freedom. Should regime change operations eventually target the AES governments, they probably won't be called regime change. They'd be labeled eliminating terrorist safe havens and protecting American families. Puppet governments installed afterward would be praised as democratic allies fighting terrorism alongside America. The geographic focus on AES countries serves another purpose, isolating these sovereignty-seeking nations from their neighbors. By branding the AES region as a terrorist epicenter, Western powers might hope to prevent other African countries from following their example. Is geopolitical quarantine designed to contain the sovereignty virus?
Now, as I've said in previous testimony, Africa remains a nexus theater from which the United States cannot afford to shift its gaze. It is home to terrorists who take advantage of conditions in Africa to grow and export their ideology. ISIS controls their global network from Somalia. It is where the Chinese Communist Party actively works to change the international rules-based order and establish regional hegemony. And it's where the Russian Federation seizes opportunities created by chaos and instability.
Here's where the mask completely slips. Langley is worried about China controlling Africa's mineral resources. But what about decades of Western control? For over a century, European and American companies have extracted Africa's wealth, while Africans remained impoverished. Now that China offers better terms, suddenly resource access becomes a security threat. Those critical mineral resources aren't abstract strategic assets. They're the foundation of modern technology and military power. Cobalt from Congo powers our smartphones and electric vehicles. Uranium from Niger fueled French nuclear power plants. gold from Marley-enriched Western banks, while children went hungry. The minerals that built Western prosperity came from African soil, extracted under exploitative colonial contracts. China's approach fundamentally threatens this extraction model. Instead of simply buying raw materials cheap and selling finished products back at high prices, China invests in African processing capabilities and infrastructure. This value-added approach means more wealth stays in Africa, which directly threatens Western profit margins. Langley's concern about Chinese naval access reveals the military dimension of resource control. Every port China builds in Africa is a port where Western navies can't automatically project power. Every Chinese naval facility represents a potential challenge to Western control over African trade routes. The strategic geography is crucial. Africa's Atlantic coast provides direct access to the Americas. Its Indian Ocean ports control access to Asia. The Mediterranean connects to Europe and the Middle East. Whoever controls African ports controls global trade flows. For centuries, this control rested with Western naval power. China's Belt and Road Initiative threatens to democratize access to these strategic positions.
As far as China is concerned and their aspirations to become a global hegemon, I'll just give a statistic that's pretty compelling. They're outspending AFRICOM militarily 100 to 1. So as they have basing aspirations across the globe, but especially in Africa, in those places, whether it's on the east side or the west side, they're trying to close the gap from a geostrategic positioning to be able to stop our joint forces for employing across the globe.
Quick question. How is China trying to close the gap, but then also outspending the United States 100 to 1? Doesn't that suggest it's America trying to close the gap? Once again, the framing is always as if America is always the leader in charge. I want to know, where are the fruits of this leadership? Please point out the success stories. They can't simply admit that China has and is out negotiating the US, and Africa now generally trusts China and Russia more than they do the US.
As far as our information operations, countering some of the propaganda that the CCP is putting out there. Yes, that's where we need to be able to confront them because we had a lot of success.
Finally, some brutal honesty. Langley admits America runs information manipulation campaigns in Africa, but notice the framing. China's messaging is manipulation, while America's is efforts to counter. This is textbook propaganda language designed to hide American information warfare behind defensive rhetoric. The admission reveals something deeper. America is losing the battle for African minds. For decades, Western media and educational systems shaped how Africans understood their own history and possibilities. Colonial education taught Africans to see themselves as inferior and Western systems as superior. Post-independence, this psychological colonialism continued through Western-controlled media, universities, and think tanks. China's information strategy threatens this narrative control by offering alternative perspectives on development, governance, and international relations. When Chinese media shows African countries successfully building infrastructure, diversifying economies, and asserting sovereignty, it challenges Western narratives about African incapacity and dependence. The information landscape Langley fears losing includes several key elements: control over how African history is taught, influence over African media narratives, dominance in academic discourse about development, and shaping of African elite opinions through Western education and training programs. What makes Chinese information warfare particularly effective is its foundation in material benefits. Chinese messaging about partnership comes with visible infrastructure projects, debt relief, and technology transfer. Western messaging about democracy and human rights increasingly comes with austerity demands, military intervention, and continued resource extraction. The language itself reveals the deception. Notice how Langley never says propaganda. He uses sanitized terms like information operations and counter campaigns. This isn't accidental. American military doctrine has perfected the art of rebranding psychological warfare with clinical professional terminology that hides its true nature. Information operations sounds like legitimate communication strategy. Propaganda sounds like what authoritarian regimes do, yet they're describing the exact same activities, deliberately shaping public perception to support political and military objectives. The goal extends beyond just countering Chinese messaging. These operations target both American civilians and African populations simultaneously. Americans need to support military interventions, while Africans need to welcome them. The most effective propaganda doesn't feel like propaganda at all, and it plants ideas that people believe they developed independently. Think of it like psychological inception. The ultimate success is when Africans demand Western intervention to save them from their own leaders, while Americans believe they're supporting noble humanitarian missions. If Malians were to call for French troops to return or protest against their own government's sovereignty decisions, that's information operations working perfectly. The target audience believes they're making their own informed choices, never realizing their opinions were carefully cultivated through strategic narrative manipulation across multiple platforms and cultural touchpoints.
When the president gave me expanded authorities and through the Secretary of Defense, we've been pressurizing ISIS in the Golan Mountains considerably. That is reinstituting deterrence in a kinetic way, and they are yielding to it to the point that they are considering moving to seek refuge elsewhere. So that this is what the warrior ethos and the lethality that we've imposed in the Golan Mountains against a foe that has the capability of attacking our homeland. I think this movement to increase our lethal effects on them is causing their to establish pause.
Did you catch that admission? Langley isn't talking about destroying terrorist groups. He's talking about moving them around like chess pieces. Seeking refuge elsewhere means pushing these groups into other African countries to create new security crises. This reveals the true nature of America's counterterrorism strategy in Africa. Instead of eliminating threats, they manage and relocate them. This serves multiple purposes. It justifies continued American military presence, creates new crises that require Western intervention, and destabilizes countries that might otherwise choose independence. The pattern is clear from other regions. In Iraq, American intervention didn't eliminate extremism, it scattered it across the Middle East, creating ISIS and other groups. As I'm sure you know, some of these groups have now shown up in Africa. This playbook is being used all over Africa. They pressure groups in one area so they spread to others, creating a permanent state of crisis that requires permanent Western solutions. Also, nobody ever seems to ask where their weapons and financing comes from, and I find this particularly troubling. Somalia provides the perfect example. Decades of American drone strikes and special operations haven't eliminated al-Shabaab. They've created a permanent low-level conflict that justifies continued American presence and influence. The goal isn't victory, it's management of controlled chaos. This strategy specifically targets countries showing signs of independence. Notice how terrorist threats always seem to emerge or intensify near countries that challenge Western interests. The AES region faces JNIM, Somalia, deals with al-Shabaab, and other potential sovereignty movements find themselves battling mysterious extremist groups that require Western assistance to combat. The expanded authorities Langley mentions represent a significant escalation in covert operations across Africa. These authorities allow for targeted killings, psychological operations, and support for proxy forces without congressional oversight or public accountability. It's assassination and destabilization disguised as counterterrorism.
Some of these countries we have shared interests in, and we see it as essential for the purposes of the shared commitment of stability and security across the region, not only for counterterrorism, but just for international rules-based order. A number of these countries see the importance of that, and that's why we have shared national security objectives so they can get to the future of being able to stand on their own and be able to create prosperity in across the future.
Listen to this language carefully. Shared interest and shared commitment. But who decided what these interests should be? When Langley talks about international rules-based order, he means the Western-dominated system that has kept Africa subordinated for centuries. The condescension is staggering. America unilaterally defines what constitutes stability and security for African countries, then calls it a shared vision. It's like a landlord telling tenants they have a shared interest in maintaining property values while never asking what the tenants actually want or need. These aren't genuinely shared interests. They're American interests that Africans are expected to adopt as their own. Real partnership would mean Africans defining their own security priorities and development goals, not conforming to predetermined Western frameworks designed in Washington boardrooms. The phrase international rules-based order is particularly revealing. Whose rules? Whose order? The same international system that allowed centuries of colonial extraction, that enforced structural adjustment programs, that maintains unfair trade relationships. This order has never served African interests. It was designed specifically to prevent African independence and prosperity. And when Langley speaks of shared commitment, he's describing a relationship where one party sets all the terms and the other is expected to be grateful for inclusion. It's the diplomatic equivalent of saying, "We all agree," after only one person spoke. The arrogance is that American officials genuinely believe Africans should be thankful for the opportunity to serve American strategic objectives. This language reveals how deeply embedded the colonial mindset remains. Even today, American policymakers cannot conceive of African countries as equal partners with their own legitimate interests that might differ from or conflict with American preferences. The assumption is always that rational African leaders will naturally align with American goals once they understand them properly.
Congressman, I was in Nairobi last week, and I would just say the message from the Secretary of Defense by the chiefs of defense across Africa was well received. They get that they need to be able to provide their own security. They get that they do not need to be dependent on us anymore. There's things that they think that they can share in the burden, and they are ready to shift, such as countries like Morocco and Tunisia and Kenya. But there's others also in that as well. So they articulate what they need to push to that level. But at this point here, I think everything is positive that they need to be able to take on their own security for Africa to prosper writ large.
This represents classic neocolonial doublespeak at its finest. Langley claims African leaders want to share the burden and reduce dependence on America. But notice what's completely absent from this narrative: any mention of actually reducing American control or influence. Burden sharing in military terminology means making local populations pay the costs while maintaining external control over strategy and objectives. It's like a landlord convincing tenants to pay for property maintenance while never offering ownership or rent reduction. The tenants bear the burden, the landlord keeps the benefits. Real independence would mean complete withdrawal of foreign military forces, like what happened in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. But Langley isn't discussing withdrawal. He's discussing cost redistribution. African countries would pay more for their own policing, while America maintains strategic oversight and ultimate decision-making authority. This burden-sharing model serves multiple purposes for Western interests. First, it reduces the financial costs of maintaining African dependencies. Second, it creates the illusion of African agency while preserving Western control. Third, it shifts responsibility for unpopular security measures onto African governments while keeping the benefits flowing to Western interests.
The significance of a hearing like this cannot be overstated, really. We are in an era of adjustment for our nation, whereby we can move into the 21st century as a dominant military force worldwide in order to maintain and preserve or establish peace.
So, that was Congressman Higgins from the Armed Services Committee. What's striking is how a sitting representative could so openly express America's desire for global military dominance without any apparent awareness of how arrogant this sounds to the rest of the world. The speaker casually assumes America has the right, even the obligation, to be the dominant military force worldwide in order to establish peace. From an American perspective, he sounds virtuous and righteous. Who appointed America as the global peacekeeper? Who decided that American military dominance equals world peace? This is exactly the kind of messianic thinking that Africans find so insulting. It's the same logic that justified every colonial intervention in history. We're not conquering you, we're bringing you peace and civilization. The language reveals everything about how America sees itself and the world. Peace, in this framework, doesn't mean the absence of conflict. It means the absence of challenges to American hegemony. When African countries assert sovereignty over their resources, that's not seen as legitimate self-determination. It's seen as a threat to peace that requires military response. This dominant military force rhetoric exposes the violence underlying American partnerships. When diplomatic persuasion fails, when economic pressure doesn't work, when information operations can't change African minds, there's always the implied threat of overwhelming military force to maintain peace. The timing of this statement is crucial. As the AES countries successfully reject Western control, as Russia offers alternative partnerships, as African sovereignty movements gain momentum, American officials respond by emphasizing military dominance. They cannot conceive of a world where America isn't in charge, where other countries make their own choices without American approval. This paternalistic worldview assumes that without American supervision, the world descends into chaos. It completely ignores the reality that American military interventions have consistently created more instability, not less. From Iraq to Libya to Afghanistan, American efforts to establish peace through military dominance have generated decades of warfare and suffering. The most insulting aspect is the assumption that this benefits everyone. American officials genuinely believe they're providing a service to humanity by maintaining global military supremacy. They cannot understand why other countries might prefer to handle their own affairs, make their own mistakes, and build their own peace without foreign military oversight. For Africans listening to this rhetoric, it's a reminder that despite all the talk of partnership and cooperation, America still sees itself as the master and Africa as territory to be managed for global stability.
What do you think, guys, about Michael Langley's last hurrah in front of this committee? I'm sure you guys have a lot to say. Maybe there's something I've missed. Please feel free to put it in the comments. But if there's any of you out there that have nothing to say, would it be too much for me to ask you to write the words hidden in plain sight in the comments section? It just lets me know that you watched the video to the end, you like what I'm doing, you want to support the channel, you want me to keep going. Thank you so much for watching this video today, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.
Thank you.